Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining today's discussion on the global economic outlook for this year as the world recovers from the coronavirus, despite the recent spikes in reported cases globally. My name is Noel Nefshahir. I'm Director of International Business Services and Global Strategic Partnerships for Automation Alley, located in Troy, Michigan. Created in 1999, Automation Alley is Michigan's Industry 4.0 Knowledge Center with more than 1,200 members. My roles and responsibilities include helping companies do business overseas and assist foreign companies set up their business operations in Michigan. Today's conference, sponsored by the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, will feature international business experts who will discuss the shifting dynamics of the global economy and how companies can best position themselves to take advantage of the opportunities and challenges of doing business around the world this year. For example, will future waves of the pandemic continue to affect the economic, political, and social outlook worldwide? How will the Biden administration impact domestic and foreign policies? And this includes, of course, the seemingly intractable U.S.-China trade conflict that it continues to impact the international economy at large. Will nationalism and the decoupling of trade and investment relations between nations lead to a new Cold War between Beijing and Washington? And what about Brexit as the UK decides to go it alone? On a related note, what is the future of manufacturing as supply chains recalibrate and reshore their production? Other things to watch out for include geopolitical risks and black swan events, i.e. like COVID last year, or potential blind spots that might disrupt the future performance of US business and industry. Closer to home, how will these factors affect Michigan business climate, especially our advanced manufacturing and other high-tech industries? Our speakers will address these questions and focus on industries and countries and regions around the world where growth opportunities are particularly strong. They will also examine projected trends in manufacturing, two-way trade and investment flows, and finally identify industries and countries that will either benefit or be challenged by globalization in the short and medium terms. By the way, if you participate in this annual Automation Alley event before, our two favorite speakers, Dr. Jim Glassman of JP Morgan Chase and Chris Holman from the Michigan Business Network, have kindly agreed to join us again today. We've added a new wrinkle to this conference, namely our very own Cynthia Hutchinson, Automation Alley's Vice President, along with Francisco Betty from the World Economic Forum in Geneva, and Dr. Lazaro of Innovalia in Spain. You guys try saying that. And then Bruno Jorge Soares of Brazil, AMHUB, will also be part of this event. They'll be talking about Industry 4.0's impact on global manufacturing and how regional ecosystems can enhance the global supply chains. Okay, it seems like we're having a technical issue bringing Jim on. So that said, I think maybe what we'll do is introduce Chris Holman. Chris, would you mind going first?
No, I'm absolutely prepared, sort of.
Great. So Chris, you're with the Michigan Business Network. Before you begin, can you describe what the Michigan Business Network is?
Yeah, it actually, probably the best way to describe it is to point everybody at it. You could go to the website, michiganbusinessnetwork.com, or you can get the free app. And we are a broadcast information perpetuator, all business, tell a lot of stories on there, also stream continual programming as though it were a radio broadcast. So our mission is to get information that businesses need to survive and the latest of that information out to those businesses. Thanks, Noel.
Great, thank you. And with that, we're going to invite you to launch your presentation.
Well, there's a couple things to start with. One is Noel was kind enough to introduce me as one of the two favorite speakers. Be advised that means we're not paid, okay? Anyway, let's tell you a little bit about this survey, which has been around a lot of years. And we're very fortunate that it has been really well received and a lot of people use it. I sit on an advisory board for the Chicago Federal Reserve, and they now call these Chris's numbers, and they use them to compare with the Beige Book. So we found that we have become very active, very accurate, and also utilized quite a bit and very respected. So this survey comes out every 6 months. This is called the COVID-19 Impact Survey because In the past, we've always done a certain survey and asked the same questions with few derivations year in and year out so that we can find some trending in all this, how businesses have done, more importantly, what they expect to do in the future. Well, the last two surveys we realized, because these last two 6-month segments have been a real aberration. They're not normal. And so to pretend you're going to get some trending out of it also would be a little abnormal. So we've redesigned, asked many of the same questions, but redesigned a lot of the questions so that we could see the impact that COVID-19 is having. So with that, let's go to the first slide here. And I'll tell you just a little bit about, is somebody moving my slide for me? I'm sorry. I thought,
yes.
There you go. Okay, good. So this is a little bit about the survey. It's like I said, semi-annual, so it comes out twice a year. It's a statewide survey, 600 small to medium-sized businesses. Now, when you do a business survey, you have to remember that 95% of the people who respond are going to be characterized as small business. So that's primarily what you're hearing here. It's conducted online to reach essential and non-essential businesses. We did this offline. We did this in person for many years. And then a couple of years running, we did it both to see how they would measure up to make sure online would be consistent. And it was extremely coincident with the in-person surveys. So we went to all online. It's produced by the Michigan Business Network, underwritten by the Accident Fund Insurance Company of America for the last 11 years, believe it or not. And it's conducted by ROI Insight. This one was in the field from November 5 to December 2nd. You can see 95% degree of confidence. So next slide, if you would. All right, here we go. Now, the way I'm going to present this is we're going to do some key takeaways, and then we'll go 2-3 slides after that to kind of show it in graphic form for those of you who are visual learners. This is not for your convenience, but it's so that I understand what it means. So satisfaction with the economy in Michigan was at a near record high 1 year ago, and overnight collapsed, and it went to a record low of 11%. And that was in our May survey. It is now rebounded from May to 28%. So it's on the way back, but 28% happy with Michigan's economy is a very low number. You can see business performance there. The percentage of businesses describe their performance as pretty good or excellent. Plummeted from 81% before the pandemic to 8% in May, but now it's back up to 27%. So people are finding ways, I think, through innovation to deal with this COVID circumstance and feeling a little better maybe about the prospects. And we'll talk a little more about that coming up here. More than 3 in 4, 76% said that they were in not so good a shape in May. That number's dropped to 50% now. So everybody else that doesn't bring those two numbers to 100% is pretty much saying status quo. 94% say their business is open now, which was only 65% in May. And again, I think this is a tribute to small business who finds these innovative ways to exist. And I would also say that this COVID-19 has been almost surgical in the way it has helped some industries and the way it has decimated others. So it's not across the board. Everybody is down over COVID-19. I own a golf course, and I will tell you that we had 5 consecutive record months. So we benefited from COVID because we were one of the few things that people could do. All right, next slide, please. So you can see 1 year ago, I'll show you these graphs so that you get a feeling. In May, there were 76%, went to 17 or 11%, then 17. And then you can see in November what it is. It went from total satisfied 11% to 28. So that crept up, right? And total dissatisfied went down by the same proportion. So, all right, next slide. These are kind of self-explanatory, so you can look at them real quick, but Then you can also see before COVID-19 what those pretty good, excellent numbers looked like, 81%, and how that went to 8% and then came back up to 27. Coincidentally, you can see that doing not so good was very high in May and then dropped proportionally in November. Next slide. All right, and then here, of course, business open. I think it's astounding that in November, 94% of the businesses that we surveyed were open. Now, you might say, well, yeah, but they're not open. There's nobody there answering the phone or on the internet. We did not get rejection in that regard. So, all right, so let's go back and find some more on the next slide, some more takeaways, right? Okay, so there's a little, that was a teaser. That was to keep your attention, right? In May, only 39% said that they were optimistic about business after COVID. So this is them looking forward. This is very important, especially in the small business sector, because a lot of businesses are driven by what ownership feels, and they buy and hire for the future related to how they feel about the future. So that number now has climbed to a majority, 52%. 52% are optimistic about business after COVID. Those who are pessimistic pin their hopes on loyal customers, or optimistic, I'm sorry, pent-up demand, which certainly will be the case in most industries, potential opportunities for growth, as well as their great staff staying busy and positive. So I would make a note here that PPP was essential to a lot of these businesses because it allowed them to keep those staffs instead of having to lose them or lay them off and have them go somewhere else if possible. Then in May, 44% said that they were pessimistic about getting back to normal after COVID-19. So that percentage is a little higher than those who were optimistic. They're saying that they have shrunk. I'm sorry, the percentage of those people saying that have shrunk now to 31% in the November. Those who are pessimistic, they cite the same thing. Customers as their top concern. Are they losing customers? At the end of the day, if you don't have customers, you don't have a business. So that's going to be the top concern, positively and negatively. And then their other concern is government overreach and overregulation. I will tell you that since 1776, government overreach and overregulation has been a concern for business. So they're always in the top 2, 3, or 4. And then, confirming their top concern, nearly half the respondents say their customer retention has decreased. So next slide, if you would. All right, here's what it looks like in graph form, expectations for post-COVID-19. You can see in May, optimistic was 29%, jumped up to 52. And I'm getting that by obviously putting the 35 and the 17 together, somewhat optimistic and very optimistic. It still lands on the optimistic side. So people are looking at the circumstance and not as devastated. As I said before, many in the small business sector have found a way to compete, found a way to survive, and so they're feeling better about the future. So next slide. These are their concerns. We talked about those. Customers, number one. This is the reasons for pessimism: government overreach, shutdown, being closed, the economy. You saw that. And uncertainty about the future. That's the pessimistic side. Okay, next slide. Then the optimistic side, of course, is customers again. 25% said they have loyal customers and pent-up demand. New opportunities. I think this is one of the things where you talk about innovation. I think this is one of the things you have to look at. Those business owners who say, yeah, this is devastating, but there are some things I can do to my advantage and to my customers' advantage to begin to prosper again, because there are new opportunities. Great employees staying positive. Again, I would point to PPP. And then you see, we all have this light at the end of the tunnel, which is the vaccine. All right. We all want it to roll out faster, et cetera, et cetera. But as soon as you see that there is a vaccine, you start saying to yourself, this thing is going to be corrected. And then the fact that they remained open, 6% were very enthused about that. So next slide. All right, so here's a few more takeaways. Nearly 2/3, 64%, are now saying that they have not laid off any employees, and more than 8 to 10, 82% now say they have not cut wages. That's pretty incredible, because the good part about that is it keeps that employee cash flow cycle operating in our economic wheel. They cite their ability to adapt and significantly increase the number of employees allowed to work remotely. This is one of the things that I think COVID-19, it's like the old story about the donkey. You can get them to do anything, but you have to get their attention first by hitting them with a 2x4. Well, I think COVID-19 was the 2x4 that we got hit with that forced us into experimenting more deeply out of necessity with remote workers. And I think we found it works. And in many cases, companies are actually better off because of it. More than 8 in 10, 81% now say that they've kept benefits the same, and 5% even say they've increased them. So that's pretty incredible statistics. Again, I point to PPP and what a help that was. Okay, next slide. So now we can take a look at them, number of employees during COVID-19. You can see 54% from May, which was 50 to 54 in November, but also increased, went from 1% to 8%. So you can see that kicked up, and of course decreased proportionally. All right, next slide. All right, these are wages during COVID-19, and you can see that pretty much stayed the same, except for the part that increased. A lot more people increased the wages, and I think PPP allowed them to do that. And of course, we all know that when you turn over employees, you're spending probably $50,000 minimum right away to retrain, to find, and then wait for them to get productive. That's an arduous task. So I'm going to guess that even in some industries, and I would point at construction, through this whole thing, they were in need of people. And so there were other places that your people could go. All right, next slide. Benefits during COVID-19, you can see up a little bit, remained the same, was a higher percentage, but 5% on the increase over 1% in May. So they're making an effort to keep their people, as you can see. All right, next slide, if you would. All right, let's take a look at this percentage of employees working remotely. Again, I think this was a real boon for business in the long run. You can see before COVID, 12%. Now in May, 43%. That was a necessity. Had to keep them out there because you couldn't have them in the office. In November, 29%. It slipped back, but that's still pretty healthy workforce that is out there. Okay, next slide, if you would. Okay, 70% for this takeaway now say that sales have decreased. That would be a given, which is down from 86% in May. So they're starting to see it come back. 64% now say that that profits have decreased, which is down from 84% in May. And 63% now say cash flow has decreased, which is down from 83%. So cash flow is how we live and breathe in the business area. So it's good to see that feeling was down. 42% now say that customer retention has decreased, which is down from 47% in May. And 45% say that customer retention has stayed the same. So let's see what that looks like in bar graphs. We'll start with the next slide. All right, so pie graph, I'm sorry. Sales during COVID-19 is what we're talking about. You can see sales decreased from 86%. It jumped up to 70%, so less of a decrease. And actually increase, you can see, went from 3% to 12%. That's the gain. All right, next slide, if you would. Profits during COVID-19, you can see They have the people who said they decreased in May, 84%. That number is down to 64%. And the gain you see in the increased, which is 12%, versus 9% over here in May. Next slide. All right, so cash flow, which is really important. You can see the cash flow, the number of people saying it's decreased has dropped 20%. That's substantial. And you see remained the same, has gone from 13 to 23%, and increased is huge here. It's over 10% more. So that's really the part that you're seeing in the decreased. All right, next slide, if you would. Customer retention during this period, you can see remained the same, has remained exactly the same from May to November. So there's this core of customers that people hang on to. You can see the decreased went down 47 to 42, but you can also see where it came. It came in the increase 11%, up from 4%. That's, you know, that's a 7% gain. That's pretty good. All right, next slide. Okay, so we're on to some more takeaways here. Financially surviving COVID-19, and this speaks to preparing to thrive after. And it's kind of interesting because nearly 9 in 10 have now applied for financial assistance, PPP, you know, EIDL, whatever, and a lot of local grants that are given out by economic development corporations, et cetera. During the pandemic, up from 79% in May. So an increase there in 10%. This is where a really essential part of the help came from. Nearly all of them, 96% have now been approved, and most have been very happy with the loan process. That's most as in basically 60%. You can see that more than 7 in 10, 76%, matter of fact, that's almost 8 in 10, say that they are either very well, 31%, or somewhat, 45% prepared for a post-COVID business. This figure kind of surprised me. I didn't think that many people had, as Noel said, a black swan plan. I know banks are forced to go through this, but always have these devastation plans. But most businesses, that's one area that they, when business is running along well, they kind of ignore. And then all of a sudden they're like, hey, did we have a plan? If they did, kick the dust off it. But this percentage was pretty high, I think. And so they will be prepared to come out of COVID-19. Nearly 2/3 say that they're enthusiastic about remaining in business after it's over. That's a pretty good percentage. The sad part of that is there's 35% on the other side saying, we don't know if we'll be remaining in business. Nearly 2/3, 65% again, expect to fully recover sometime next year. And you can see 26 and 17 say, 26 say the recovery will happen, won't happen until 2022, 17 are uncertain they'll ever recover. So when this light at the end of the tunnel actually becomes apparent, we don't know. Okay, and they don't know. Next slide, please. So this is what it'll look like in graph form here. Have you applied for assistance? You can see in May, 58% had, in November, 96% had, and you can see the other are way down. 89% in total said basically yes. So next slide, if you would. Satisfaction with the loan process. I thought this was pretty good. 59% satisfied, almost 6 in 10. That's somewhat satisfied or very satisfied. I think as quickly as this was put together and as quickly as the feds got it out, I think to have 6 in 10 satisfied, I think that's a pretty good number. We all know it could have been done better. We all know it could have been more targeted. But to have it out, have business respond at that rate says that there was mission accomplished. All right, next slide. How prepared are you, to come out of COVID? Very unprepared, you can see, was pretty low in both surveys, 3 dropping to 2. Somewhat unprepared was also pretty low, 7% drop into to 7%. But you can see that somewhat prepared stayed very consistent, but very well prepared jumped up. And I'm suggesting that when this thing hit, those who had an idea of what was really going on started getting their management together and saying, okay, we got to have a plan for when we come out of this as well. All right. Next slide. Enthusiasm for staying in business after COVID-19. You can see November was up 4 points in very satisfied. They were down a little bit in the somewhat satisfied, extremely enthused about coming out of business. Still coming out of business, you got 66% that are feeling pretty good about it. So that's a pretty good number. All right, next slide. Expected time frame. This is a crapshoot. Nobody knows if the vaccine hits and we start getting out in the numbers we're talking about. This thing could be settled in the private sector in 6 to 12 months. That means customers will start coming through the door at restaurants, hospitality, industry-related companies, et cetera, et cetera. That'll turn things around pretty quickly, but for business owners to extrapolate where do I think it's going to happen, you can see that the highest percentage by 6 points is not until 2022. Okay, next slide. All right, so we're looking at, I think what might be our final key takeaways here. In May, 52% believe doing business in Michigan would never be the same after COVID-19. That number dropped to 47%. 5%, it doesn't seem like a big swing, but it has the attitude moving in the right direction. And then in May, almost 60% believe their business would emerge at least somewhat weaker after COVID-19, and that number dropped to 42%. So again, feeling more enthused about the future. That is extremely important and extremely pertinent to business. If you can get management or ownership, whatever the case may be, to say, no, I think we're going to be fine. It's amazing how the structure and the extrapolations and the expenditures and the hiring practices and everything else change based on that. 37% now say they'll emerge stronger, which is up from 21%. So you got, that's pretty good enthusiasm. All right, next slide. So you can see how will business change after COVID-19. It will be changed forever. You can see the numbers growing there. I have to agree. How many Zoom meetings have you been on? You know, are you less trusting your employees because they're working remote? I think what's happened from a productivity standpoint is remote working is probably turning out to be very efficient. And if I worry for anyone in this whole coming out of COVID-19, it's probably people who own commercial property. Because I see people on 3-year leases, when those leases come due, maybe looking at those facilities and saying, we don't need 60,000 square feet, we need 6 because of the way we've been doing business. Property managers, by the way, will tell you, we think that they'll be more attuned to distancing and they may come back and need more property. I would like to think that's the case. All right, next slide. Will your business emerge from COVID-19 weaker or stronger? And you can see the numbers, excuse me, actually going up. When you look at no change, it stayed, you know, pretty much where it was. When you look at somewhat stronger and much stronger, you're looking at it going up quite a bit from the 21% to the 37%. So those are that bodes well for the future. Next slide. All right, I'm sorry. These are the final takeaways. They tend to. This is in response to how has this whole thing been managed, and we wanted to ask this. And this is not a political question, and we want to really be adamant about that because we all have our opinions on how the state of Michigan has handled this. But they tend to blame the government response for making a recovery more challenging. 7 in 10 fear that small business voices are largely not being heard by lawmakers, which is up from 63% in May. This is a question, quite frankly, I wish that we had been asking all along. And the reason is, we always see in the top 2 or 3 the worry in the business community about government encumbrance, but we never ask, do you think the business voice is being heard? And I wish we had that. We've seen this dropped a little bit because things are getting better. And I wish I could find out, and we may put this in the next survey. I wish I could find out if it stays at 63% or if it goes down as things continue to get better. Nearly 6 in 10, 57% say that the state's response to COVID-19 has been too strong. Well, 43% say it has been either all right or not strong enough. That looks like a big difference in percentages. You know, you're actually talking about 55 versus 45%. So it's almost a split view on that. All right, next slide. You can see in May, this is about the voices being heard, that not at all has gone up, that a little bit they feel that way has gone up, and a great deal, of course, that their voices are being heard has gone up 1%, and then a lot has gone down. So I think you're feeling better because a moderate amount is the one that makes up the difference. They may feel better, but like I said, this is kind of a split decision on this. You know, this is the fighter winning by 1 round in a 15-rounder. All right, next slide, if you would. And then this is the state's response. You can see in November that they felt the state was way too strong. 33% said about right, 11% said not strong enough. So if you put those two together, again, it's 44%. So if you would, next slide. So those of you who want to get coffee, it's a good time. I want to thank you all. And for those of you who are still awake, thank you for staying with me. I appreciate that. And Noel, I think I saw a question or two come in.
Great presentation, and incidentally, for everybody that's participating in today's event, the presentations will be made available to you this afternoon, and that will include yours, Chris, as well as Jim Glassman, our next speaker. So we do have a couple of questions. One, can you clarify what the beige book means? Because as a trained economist, I actually just learned about it maybe 10 years ago. Now it sits next to my Bible on my coffee table. So it's a really, really insightful document. So can you just briefly describe for everybody what that is?
Yeah, the beige book is something that the feds put out, and it's basically a survey of businesses to get their attitudes, to get what they're seeing in their marketplace. I know when we meet as an advisory board, we go around the room. We've got representations on that board from every sector, most sectors of business. And it's like, what do you see happening in construction? What do you see happening, you know, in retail? What do you see happening in entertainment, et cetera, et cetera? So then they take that compilation of all those and they put it in report form, which is what the beige book is.
All right, in the few minutes we have, I want to address some of the questions by the attendees. We're going to start with David Derbyshire. He's asking what size of the firms that were served, what are the size of the firms that you surveyed and which industries were represented?
Yeah, well, they're varied. And quite frankly, I would like to say, if you want to see this more in depth and get that information, it is on our website. So
great.
You go right to the MichiganBusinessNetwork.com and find the latest MFBI. You will find that it is a random, constructed random sampling. And by that, I mean, we made sure that most industries were represented and that there was a huge smattering of sizes of businesses that were representative of the size of businesses that are registered within the state of Michigan. So you'd see manufacturing, but you'd see fewer manufacturing than you would see service industry companies, right?
And one other question, is there data for those that have received PPP loans versus those that didn't?
Yeah, no, only that they didn't. We have those who didn't apply. The number was very low. You saw it. I think it was like 4% or 5% who hadn't applied. But we don't have anything beyond that as far as
right. Okay. All right.
Or how it helped. But our next survey will ask that question. Did PPP help you? Right.
Great. We actually have a couple other questions, but I want to respect everybody's time. So, Chris, would it be okay if we sent these questions from Kathy Myers and a couple anonymous attendees for you to respond to?
Absolutely. I'll send the
All right. Well, one of the things about your presentation I loved was the 2x4 analogy, and it's I think the pandemic has really forced companies to do what they should have been doing prior to the pandemic, to achieve economies of scale, increase productivity, and efficiency. And it got me into thinking a long time ago that change from within an organization is sometimes slow and bureaucratic, but when it's imposed by external forces and companies don't have the choice, it really gets the attention of business and industry leaders. So you're seeing the acceleration of technologies, and that's just being one that we're using right now with video conferencing, and also the adoption of Industry 4.0 technologies, applications, and processes, which we'll hear from a little bit later in this session. But Chris, great job. Thank you so much.
No, one of my favorite sayings is nothing heightens a man's creativity like the thought of being hung in the morning. And I think that's
Oh, boy, that's for sure. That's got to go in the book of best quotes. So anyway,
I only got to say it once.
Well, I'm going to say it again and again. So Chris, thank you again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. So has Jim Glassman joined us?
I am.
Oh, Jim, so happy to see you.
So sorry about the mix-up here.
No, that's okay. I was going to resort to doing slides on my summer staycation of me.
You would have done a better job.
Doing, you see me slouching on the couch watching TV, consuming Diet Pepsi and bonbons. But at any rate, with us, Jim, Dr. Jim Glassman, Managing Director, JP Morgan Chase and Company, and Head Economist, Chase Commercial Banking in New York City. Jim, thank you again for kindly agreeing to keynote today's event, and the floor is yours.
Just to follow up on something Chris said, the biggest worry I hear about the future does come from the commercial real estate guys, because everybody is imagining that, well, this is the way it's going to be. And, I would just say time out a minute, because we all understand. I mean, being able to work remotely, communicate remotely, it's great. We don't have to travel. There's all kinds of expenses we don't have to do. It frees up more time. We don't, and all that commuting time. A lot of people in New York, where I worked, can spend 3 hours a day commuting. But you forget that there's tremendous benefits in doing the way we did it. And what I find, we do a survey of our employees, 250,000 of them. And what's interesting is we find the younger you are, the more you want to be in the office. Well, it's partly the social milieu, but it's also, that's where you learn stuff. It's very difficult to learn when you're sitting at your kitchen table on the computer trying to figure out who do I email to give me an answer to a certain question. It just takes it, in the learning process, this is a very inefficient way to do it. So the only thing I would say, because I haven't made up my own mind yet to how to think about the future. There's one other moment in life that I remember where something really jolted the way we do things. And what I learned from that, this was in the aftermath of the 9/11, the terrorist attacks on the Twin Towers in Washington, D.C. I remember the conversation for a few weeks after that event. People in my community said, we're never going to travel again. Airplane business is dead. But what didn't take long, that there was a danger that we didn't know about, didn't think about, It didn't take long for them to show how flying could be safe. All you had to do was, once the public was confident that the cockpit could be locked, it didn't take long for people to quickly go back to where they were. So just think about it. This crisis that we face has an answer, and the answer is going out right now. It's a healthcare crisis, but if you have vaccines that are 95% effective, better than the flu shot, I'll bet you anything, once we get our hands around this and it passes, it'll be like I remember the polio scare. Once you get your hands around something, I'll bet you that we are in a rush to get back to life. Now, there's a lot of we're learning there's a lot of great options here in using technology. It's giving us a lot more flexibility, a lot more backup options. But honestly, I think it's way too early to rewrite the story about the future. And so if I were in commercial real estate, I'm not so sure that this is really going to change things dramatically, particularly if we get better medical answers. So anyway, I want to talk about two things. If you don't mind going to the first picture so I can remember where I was. Go on to the next one. Yeah. Let's go to the next one. Okay. Honestly, I'm going to talk about two things. The broad elements about the crisis we're dealing with right now. And then I want to shift to something that I just can't believe. And I want to understand what's going on. And it's what the equity market is echoing. And I think the equity market sort of embraces the idea that I want to explain about the COVID crisis. And it's telling us there's something much bigger going on. So I just want to give you the sound bites to that story, because I think we all know what some of the themes are. Now, on the COVID crisis, I honestly think that we got our hands around this. And I think the optimism that you heard about, the hopefulness that you heard about in Chris's surveys is exactly the way to think about it. And I see this in our own client base, the commercial bank clients. I think the easiest way to think about what we're dealing with is to think of it as it's the script of a natural disaster and not a business cycle. And the reason I say that is because before we came into this crisis, the economy was in just spectacular condition. And the Fed kept telling you that. And what we were referring to, we economists just couldn't believe our eyes, actually, that we never thought that you could get unemployment down to 3.5% without, seeing inflation problems. I mean, this is a 1950s kind of story. And this is not what I learned at Northwestern. I learned you get unemployment down to low levels and you start seeing all kinds of inflation problems, and that forces the Fed to have to think about tightening. And that sets the stage for a new recession. So whenever unemployment gets low, people in the markets tend to start hyperventilating about recession. And you did hear that, but it was never visible. And I think when you listen to what the Fed said, it was quite stunning. The epiphany for them was that they realized that there's something different about the economy, not as inflationary as they thought, and that there are a lot of good things that come from promoting low unemployment. And they started talking about all the social benefits. So this is why Jay Powell and many of them said the economy's in a good spot. Why that matters is because if the economy is in a good spot, and then you have a health crisis that forces you to ask people to turn out the lights temporarily, then you would think that this would look and feel more like a natural disaster, that when it passes, you let people turn the lights on again, and we can get back on our feet more quickly. And that's kind of exactly what's happened. If you think about all the crazy things, if I told you that we asked people to restaurants, bars, fitness centers, that people in the air travel business, asked them to turn out the lights. And when they did that, by the way, the company that follows trends in the small business community told us that roughly 40 million people were being furloughed. This crisis was born mostly by the small business community. Most of us were able to transition from office to home, shop online, communicate virtually. So when that happened, there was a lot of upheaval. But and you would think, well, gee, if unemployment goes to 15 to 20%, this smells like the Great Depression kind of stuff. And there were people telling you, this is where we're going. And if I told you back in those dark days in March and April that, don't worry, the consumer is going to spring out of the gate starting in May, and by the end of summer, we'll be back to normal. The real estate activity is going to be on the moon. That business CapEx activity, other than aircraft, is going to be back to normal. That the signs of financial distress aren't going to be what you normally assume. That state and local community finances, they'll be a little slower, but not that much. It'll mainly be because of sales tax collections. Overall tax collections grew 3% in the most recent 12 months through September. And that's down only a little bit from the 5% growth of the year before. These are not the kind of things that would come to your mind if I told you unemployment's exploded to 15 to 20%. Well, so why did this happen? It's not a mystery. As you heard from many officials, as they were trying to develop this help for people, the mantra was, this is not your fault. We are trying to figure out how to help people. And it didn't take a lot of imagination to know who you had to help, because if you're asking restaurants and bars and fitness centers to turn out the lights, you know where the furloughs are going to be. So I think when you think about what we did here, there was nothing about this. There's nothing about this crisis that looks anything like the past. And this picture here is showing you unemployment trends. You've never seen anything that looks like this. If you go to the next picture, you get a little more color on this. All those lines are showing you the normal course of events in all the business cycles since World War II. Unemployment tends to rise for a couple of years and then slowly come back down. And if this were like a normal business cycle, you would see something a lot like that. You would see unemployment eroding, and then we economists would be telling you this is going to take 10 years to get out of. But the red line is showing you what's actually going on, which is just another way of saying, this is not a business cycle. And it's not a business cycle for a couple reasons. First of all, one of the mysteries, there's been a lot of innovation, as you know, over the years. And one of the mysteries to economists is that we know this is making us more productive, but why isn't it showing up in the metrics? And I think part of the issue is that for the last 10 years, with the economy recovering, at first people were nervous. Is it really recovering? It was a really bad recession a decade ago. But most businesses have been focused on trying to get their staff levels up to speed. And one of the reasons it's been very difficult, because starting in about 2008, the baby boom generation is beginning to approach retirement age. And so you have a very large population that's moving to retirement, leaving jobs, and businesses are trying to find people to replace those people who have a lifetime of skills. And so I think what's happened in the last decade or so, everybody's been more focused on preparing for the future and trying to find people. And all this innovation is going on, but no reason to really go crazy with it. Not until you face a crisis that you have to survive. And I think what we're seeing this year is, and most of my clients were saying, gosh, I didn't realize how easy it would be to transition my people to work from home, to do, with the help of digital financing tools, to virtual communication. This technology has shown people that actually there's a lot of things you can do. Most of us were able to transition pretty quickly. And so I think in the equity market, well, most people knew that for many people, the life was going to continue. We would be able to continue through lockdowns. Secondly, we all knew this is not an economic crisis. This is a medical crisis. We all knew that at the end of the day, you couldn't hope to get through this until we had a medical answer. But we also knew there was a lot of interesting stuff going on in the medical science. And I was getting emails from people that I'm connected to at Hospital University of Pennsylvania. And I was being told, there's a lot of work that's been going on for a couple of decades on this particular virus. This is not a new thing for the medical science. And people in the market, we were getting the idea that there were actually, there was a lot going on. We knew that it would take time to get new vaccines processed, tested, approved, but everybody always had the idea here that sometime you'd have an answer. But I think the biggest reason why this feels to me more like a natural disaster phenomenon, and you know what, I have in my mind what happened to New Orleans when Hurricane Katrina came through. The hurricane rips up New Orleans. The nation mobilizes resources to help New Orleans get back on its feet. And within 2 years, employment was right back where it started. And to me, that's the difference between, they're both bad. Natural disaster, business cycle, they're both bad. But the dynamic of a natural disaster is much quicker. And that's what's going on right now. And I think the one thing that made this so different from anything in the past that we've known is the way we responded, what Washington did. And I think it's really kind of telling. We sort of know this story. We're all distracted by how polarized everybody is, how divided Washington is. But I've always known from the past, no matter what you think of the body politic, when we have a real crisis, Washington knows how to come together. And in fact, you could argue that when things are going good, it sort of opens the door for all kinds of argument and fighting. Democracy is noisy, and thank God we live in a democracy because it lets people have views and express them. And so, but here's what happened. And I knew by the evening of March 27th, before the ink was dry on the CARES Act, I kind of had an idea that this was going to be a very different story unfolding, because when you saw what they had done, I've never seen anything like it. And it worked on two fronts. The CARES Act, the actions of Congress and the executive office unleashed about $4.5 trillion of resources to help people. A lot of it, some of it was help for airlines, help for the medical system, but most of it was targeted to the population that they knew would be disrupted. The 40 million people who were furloughed, the 10 million people who were in the gig economy, who had no unemployment insurance. And what Congress did was they checks in the mail, doubling the unemployment insurance benefits, creating a special program for gig workers, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. And all of that, there were two ways you could see how that was benefiting people. You could either look at the income statement of the household sector, or you could look at the bank deposits of households. If you look at bank deposits, what you saw was retail bank deposits soared from the end of February to the end of April, when the money was going out, went up $2.5 trillion. If you look at the income statement, what you saw was labor income went down, but total income went up. And because people didn't have as many ways to spend money, you saw this explosion in the amount of saving that people were doing. And what I know, as I did my dissertation on consumer behavior and how people save. And what I know is when the saving rate goes from 8% to 33% in the course of 1 month, that's not because people said, you know what, I better be careful. Let's save because I don't know what the future looks like. That happened. Nobody has the resources to be able to suddenly overnight save a third of your income. That happened because the government transferred a huge amount of money to the household sector. And what I remember learning, well, all of us economists learn when we go to school, our first class in economics, you learn that when the government does things like transferring income, borrow money in the markets and transfer it to the household sector, by itself, that doesn't do anything for GDP. Not until you and I spend the money. Not until it shows up in consumer spending does it affect GDP. So when you saw what was going on, here's the government spending all this money and GDP goes down very sharply in the spring quarter. And everyone's saying, well, what's the good of all that money? Well, it's because nothing happens until people actually spend the money. So, so this is all the support we got on the income side. One way to think about this is what Washington did was gave people paid leave temporarily. And many of my clients actually said, you know, in June and July, when things were opening up again, many people were having a hard time convincing people to come back, their employees to come back off of unemployment to their jobs, because frankly, when the pay they were getting on unemployment insurance was better than what they were getting as a waiter. And so that you know, to me, that was music to my ears, because it told me we might have gone overboard, but that's fine. When you tell people they can't work, you ought to be able to compensate them temporarily. Now, but the other thing that happened, and Chris talked about it, that PPP program was quite innovative. And what it did was giving businesses the resources to pay for 2 months worth of their labor costs and rent and utilities and mortgage payments if they put people back on their payrolls. That, by the way, copies the spirit of a really interesting program that Germany has had in place for 100 years. It's called Kurzarbeit, short work program. It's all automatic pilot. If there's a disruption, businesses send an email to the government to tell them what the problem is. The government sends them a check automatically to cover their costs. And when the crisis passes, everything unwinds, goes back. And that's why, by the way, if you look at what happened in Germany in the financial crisis 10 years, 12 years ago, that the financial crisis did great harm to a lot of people. Unemployment everywhere went up. In Germany, it went down. And I never knew about this program until I had clients telling me about this in this crisis. Now, so what that tells you, this is why things are shaping up the way they have. So just quickly, where do we stand right now? And then how to think about 2021. If you look at what's going on, the economy collapsed March and April, and then beginning in May, it began to rebound. If you look at monthly GDP, it began to rebound. So this was like effectively on paper, it's going to look like a 2-month recession. Began to rebound. And over the course of the summer and the fall, even with the flare up in new cases, national output has recovered about almost 75% of the ground we lost in March and April as we start the new year. The labor market has been slower because a lot of the new activity, as we all shift to digital platforms and online shopping, a lot of the new activity is more in the higher productivity areas where you don't have, you know, Amazon's doesn't have the same number of people. They have a lot of people distributing, but it's less labor intensive. So no surprise that the labor economy is not recovering quite as quickly, but unemployment's come down from 15 to 20%. They weren't quite sure what it really was back in April, down to about 6.7% right now. And that's where we are starting out 2021. Now, if you listen carefully, what you'll notice is that the mood in my community, my peers, has turned very positive in the last 4 weeks. And the reason is because we can skip. You can go forward. This visual, by the way, just tells you it's from the Center, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, just is outlining all the different things that were done back in March. They haven't yet folded in the Christmas package. Let's go to the next one. This is what happened. This is the deal that happened over the Christmas break. And this is the first reason why everybody suddenly, when you went away for Christmas break, you might have thought we were never going to, the president was saying, I'm not signing anything unless I get a $2,000 check in the mail. He didn't sign that bill that Congress came up with until Sunday evening after Christmas. And so when we came back into the new year, people realized, well, they hadn't really counted on this thing, this $900 billion package. And it extends unemployment benefits and it helps reactivate some of the PPP programs and checks in the mail, $600. By itself, that we realized that this program was going to boost economic growth in 2021 by about 3 percentage points. So if you thought we were going to be growing, maybe trend-like growth, you didn't think we were going to get anything like this, right away, in the blink of an eye, you were willing to say 2021, we're going to grow 5%. Now, the next thing that happened was the Georgia races. Indirectly, that changed the story too, because when the Democrats got nominal control of Senate, it's still a very divided House. And a divided House, in my book, is a good deal because a divided House gives more voice to the guys in the center. You're going to see all those guys who are Romney, Susan Collins, Klosky, what's his name from West Virginia, they make a difference now because the guys in the middle can shift the balance one way or the other. But when the Georgia races came in, we said to ourselves, well, this is going to enhance the probability of getting yet another stimulus package through. And the Biden administration picked up on what President Trump was talking about. He wants to get the payment up to $2,000 per person rather than $600. That costs about $400 billion. But every new guy coming into town usually has a honeymoon. And my guess is because the coronavirus crisis is the crisis of the day, and it's probably made a big difference in the election, Congress is going to be working very hard to keep doing more. And I think the words of Jay Powell come to my mind when he was pleading for Congress to do something. He said, the risk of doing too much is much less than the risk of not doing enough. And I think that theme is going to drive a lot of the debate here. So automatically, we're now sitting around thinking, gee, I wonder if we get another round of stimulus, we could be talking about 5 to 10% growth this year. That would more than make up for the lost ground last year. So I think when you put the 2 years together, I think it's very likely by the end of this year, we're going to see the economy pretty much back to where we started. 3.5 to 4.5% unemployment is very possible, because if you get an economy growing 5 to 8% this year, that way offsets the modest decline from last year over the 4 quarters of the year. So let me shift gears for one. I think it's important to try to ask yourself what could be going on here, because I think what it tells you, I pay attention to the equity market, because when people sort of understand the crisis of the day and figure out that you're supposed to look beyond it, and then what they see tends to get echoed in the equity market. So let me show you something. Let's go forward a minute. I'm going to skip a couple pictures. Let's go forward. Another one. Go to the next one. This is just give you a summary of, this is the Fed's view, my view of the unemployment rate. Let's go, I'll skip this. This is an amazing story. Do you know that startups, by the way, this blue picture, in the middle of the crisis, the number of applications for new business startups exploded. Are you kidding me? That's a reminder. It's 50% higher than it was. It's a reminder that bad times do a lot of damage to people, but they also create lots of opportunities. And what I love about the business community is this is a community of people who are always looking for another way. You know, they're always looking for an opportunity. I think this tells you something really amazing about the American resilience, that you have businesses that their first thought in May, it exploded. Their first thought is, how can I do this better? There's just all kinds of new opportunities because there are guys that are struggling. So let's flip forward two more. And I'll stop at this picture right here. This picture is pretty stunning to me. So if I went to sleep when I got out of grad school, which wasn't yesterday, and you asked me, where do you think the stock? I would tell you where GDP is, and you asked me, where do you think the stock market should be? I would tell you what all economists would tell you, that the value of the U.S. stock market should be about equal to the size of the U.S. economy. What I'm showing you is the ratio of the stock market to the U.S. economy, and the logic goes like this: after-tax profits in the post-war period have been about 6%, 6% of GDP, and we would say, okay, profits are 6% of GDP. Apply a multiple of 16 times earnings, and you'll come up with the value of the market should be about equal to parity with the U.S. economy. And in good years, that's kind of where it was. And then in the last couple of decades, it's been climbing steadily. And we're getting to a place where the equity market, forget about the COVID crisis, this has been going on for a while. The equity market is approaching almost double the size of the US economy. And I think, I don't think we really have our hands around this, but I think it's got something to do with three macro stories that I have been struggling with for 2 decades. And they are the reasons why I'm genetically optimistic. Number one, the inflation dynamic in the US economy has changed. It's not as inflationary. This was an epiphany to the Fed last year. It's the reason why they're changing the way they do things. And I think it has a lot to do with all the dismantling of all the Great Depression era regulations back in the 20s and 30s. That began when I was in grad school. We started to deregulate the airlines, the railroads, the trucking, telecommunications, all that innovation that exploded in the 1990s is a part of this. So I think that has something to do with it. Secondly, it's the innovation, the technological changes that we know, whether our metrics show it or not, we know that all this innovation is making us more productive. And to me, if you look at the performance of profits of American businesses, the average tax profits after tax profits were about 6% of GDP. For the last 2 decades, that's been rising, and it's up in the 10% level. And my friends tell me, well, business cycles are always, things come and go, and everything reverts to normal. And I think people have been thinking this would revert to normal, but it isn't. And this is the heart of the issue that is driving the income divide in America. The superstar firm is doing really well. The guys that work at brick and mortar are losing jobs because activity is going to online activity. That's what's really behind here. It's got pluses, it's got minuses. But I think the elephant in the room is, frankly, when I ask my friends, this is the simplest way to think about it. I ask my friends, how would you explain this? The value of the US stock market is rising relative to the size of the US economy. It's almost double the US economy. And most people will tell me, what's the relevance of the US economy? The world is opening up. There's a great awakening going on in Asia. And there's new opportunities, Asia, Latin America, Africa, Middle East, and there's new opportunities opening up everywhere. So, and our businesses are operating globally. So they are benefiting from this process. And so US GDP, what it tells you is there's just a lot of energy rising beyond our shores. And our companies are operating in that. And I really think this is the story that's been going on in my mind. I date it back to 2001 when China joined the WTO. It's really that's slightly oversimplified, but it tells you what we all know, that the world is changing. We're living in a global economy. The world is waking up. I can't tell you how many times I've got to talk to Indian business people at night. They're more American than Americans are. It's all by text messaging. I mean, it's the world just suddenly has just gotten really small and opened up. And I think that's what this story is telling us. And I think it's worth thinking about, because I've never, of all the economic stories that I have known about in the past century, to me, this is the most interesting and the biggest. It's a transforming story, and it tells us that something big is going on. And what's interesting is the COVID crisis didn't really change this. And I think it didn't change it because the COVID crisis actually showed us that technology can help us work through disruptions like this. And
yeah, I agree, Jim. I agree with you absolutely. And we're going to hear a little bit more about how technology has really helped us recover from this this crisis. We have a couple questions, but one thing I do want to reiterate: you mentioned that the COVID vaccine is 95% effective, and it's more effective than the flu shot. What is the efficacy of the flu shot?
About 50%.
Unbelievable.
My doctors tell me if I get it. This is why I never know whether I should get it. They tell me there's a 50% chance we got the right virus. So
right, yeah,
it's just
exactly.
it's just like the measles, and polio was probably slightly more effective. Mm-hmm. But I think what's really interesting about this is these guys, when the Chinese gave the genetic code to our medical researchers back in March, within days they had the answer. It just takes time to develop it. and test it, can test it out. It's a whole new arena that they're working in, this messenger RNA, and I think it's I think there's going to be a lot of medical benefits, spin-offs that come from this.
Jim, you know, we talked about black swans and also the elephant in the room, and two of those being the federal debt and China. How are we going to pay for all this stimulus and draw down our $30 trillion in debt? This is a question that came from Christian Clay, a friend of mine from the Council General of Mexico. Would you be able to address both China and the federal debt?
Yeah, China, the story about China, I think the guy that best got his hands around this, a Korean politician told me, he wrote a book about China relations. They're very obsessed with China because China's a big deal for them. He told me the future looks like an elephant and a tiger. The tiger is afraid of the elephant and the elephant is a vegetarian. So what that means is we are moving in a world where we're afraid of China, but we need each other. There's mutual benefits in this relationship. So we're going to find a way to work through this. And because there's too many benefits. And, you know, when you look at what's going on in China, everybody's amazed how rapidly China is rebounding. You know why? Because the American consumer is the big driver to the Chinese economy because they look at everything you buy made in China, right? So if you're helping consumers get back on their feet, no surprise to me that China is going to be noticing a huge improvement in their exports, and that's what's going on.
Sure.
On debt, I think what we're dealing with right now is not the debt issue. It's part of the reason is it's not showing up in the market because the Fed is buying a lot of this debt, by the way. So it's a little bit of an illusion. You know, what the Fed is doing is masking what would normally be a problem. I think when you have a crisis, this is what you have to do. And if we didn't do it, the debt situation would be worse. I think that the debt issue that matters most is the long-term outlook, because what's happening is as our economy is slowing down because we're aging, people are retiring, the natural growth of the economy is slowed down. And what that means is our revenues are not going to be growing as fast enough to pay for the Medicare and the Medicaid. So the answer lies in what we saw happen in the Eisenhower era. When we came out of World War II, the debt was 100% of GDP, just where it is now. And by the time we got to the late 60s, it had come down. And the reason is not because they raised taxes or cut spending, it's because we had an economic boom and the national highway system. And, you know, of course, it was a different phenomenon because the US emerged out of World War II, the lone superpower. But there are things we can do to address this long-term imbalance. And that's why, you know, the real problem is demographics is slowing down our natural growth. So economists think the best way to deal with this and solve the fiscal problem is to focus on infrastructure investment and immigration reform, because our businesses have 6.5 million jobs they can't find people for. If we could find people, we could grow faster. So I really think that's the issue to deal with, is what the CBO has been telling us for a long time, the longer term outlook.
Great. Well, Jim, thank you very much. We had a couple other questions in the queue, but in the interest of time, would it be okay if we just sent them to you?
Send them, yeah.
All right. Well, wonderful job. Thank you again, Jim.
Thank you.
Now we're going to shift gears a little bit and move to our panel discussion, introduction to the World Economic Forum's Advanced Manufacturing Hubs. And we're going to discuss Industry 4.0's impact on global manufacturing, how regional ecosystems can enhance global supply chains. You're probably wondering what Industry 4.0, the Internet of Things, smart factory, whatever you want to call it, has to do with today's event. Well, pretty much everything, especially when you consider that the technology is supporting Industry 4.0, such as artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning, were responsible for accelerating, in record time, mind you, the discovery of the vaccines to combat COVID. So one of the Economic Forum's major platforms is shaping the future of advanced manufacturing and production. In 2019, Automation Alley was named AMHUB, which is really a really good distinction for us. And especially when you consider that this is the direction that Automation Alley has chosen to go. So we're going to talk a little bit about Industry 4.0. And joining me today to discuss the mission and goals of AMHUB are Francisco Betti, our good friend, Head of Advanced Manufacturing and Production at the World Economic Forum in Geneva, Switzerland. And he's going to focus a little bit about the impact of what we also refer to as the fourth industrial revolution in advanced manufacturing. Our very own Cynthia Hutchinson, Vice President of Automation Alley, will talk about her role in maximizing Automation Alley's reach nationally and globally, serving as Automation Alley's liaison to the World Economic Forum, and to help and shape, helping to shape and promote the organization's Industry 4.0 initiatives. Joining us from AMHUB in the Basque region of Spain is Dr. Oscar Lazaro, Managing Director of Innovalia. Dr. Lazaro has more than 20 years experience in digital manufacturing field, and also is a visiting professor at the Electrical and Electronic Engineering Department of the University of Strathclyde. And in addition, we also have Bruno Jorge Soares. He's here representing the Brazilian AMHUB. Bruno is also manager of the ABDI, which is the Brazilian Agency for Industrial Development. Cynthia, I hope I did a good job of setting this panel discussion up, but do you want to add anything before we go to the Q&A?
You did a great job, but I was just going to remind everybody that one of the things we talk about is this is such a global, broad. You just heard Chris and Jim talk about big global economic impacts and what's going on at a very high level. And one of the things that we pride ourselves in Michigan, and I think all the areas that are AMHUBs have a similar, unique skill, which is being able to take applied theory and turn it into practical. So one of the things Michigan does very well is applied engineering. People develop technologies and concepts all over the world, and we really apply them well here. And what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes here as a group is how we're going to be applying what we know is going on economically on a very local level in each of our regions.
All right. Well, thanks for setting the table. I'm scrambling to find the questions. I got to bring my leaf blower into the office, get me organized. Okay, here we go. So Francisco, you're our first victim. And welcome, Francisco. Nice to have you. Happy New Year. Could you briefly describe the formation and vision of the World Economic Forum?
Well, Noel, many thanks first of all for hosting me and hosting us today. I mean, I'm delighted to be here with all of you and engage in this conversation with the business community in Michigan. Maybe let me first mention for those of you who are not familiar that the Global Network of Advanced Manufacturing Hubs, it's one of the initiatives we are driving within the platform that I lead that focuses on the future of advanced manufacturing and productions, which is one of the many global initiatives we are running at the forum. Now, what it is, I mean, it brings together at a global level, and by leveraging the neutrality and impartiality of our global platform, local manufacturing communities. So we are collaborating with local communities, either at a regional or state level, but especially in those places around the world for which manufacturing represents a significant share of the GDP. And you asked me the question, Noel, why did we create and why did we help establish this global network of local hubs? I think there are multiple reasons, but we probably can take, first of all, a historic approach to it. And if I can build on some of the comments that Jim was making before, I think it's pretty much based on the acknowledgement that we live in a global world, and value chains have been globally connected. They have been global. They have been globally connected for a long time. Yes, they have been going through a lot of stresses and stress tests, but we still see a lot of interconnections and interdependencies that deserve a conversation and possibly higher levels of cooperation going forward. Now, when you look at the global outlook and where the world is today, I think that we should recognize that some of the disruptions that we are seeing today are not new at all. So if you look at the post-COVID scenario, someone could argue that the combination of the fourth industrial revolution and what technology is been delivering over the past decade for manufacturing and business more broadly, that in combination with some of the latest geopolitical developments at the global level, geopolitical tensions, and the pressure coming from the environment, you could argue that all those trends in combination were already forcing manufacturers to look for new approaches to further streamline both their production and business capabilities, and to rethink their manufacturing footprint and approach to value chains. Now, what COVID did is to further accelerate some of those transformations, mainly by enforcing digital as a way to build resilience, agility, and flexibility, but also to accelerate the repositioning or the reconfiguration of the manufacturing footprint, especially for those companies who had a global one. Now, in that scenario, and it's within that framework that we believe that this dialogue in between different local manufacturing community is of essence and is extremely important. On the one hand, is because we need to understand what is happening globally to be able to come up with the best policies, with the best strategies to advance and further reinforce the local manufacturing strategies and communities. On the other hand, because we believe that by staying connected globally, we can learn from each other. I mean, I'm sure that the solutions that are required today are going to be unique and need to be tailored. But still, I think that region states have the ability to learn from each other. And there are many areas in which collaboration can happen. And then the second one is because, you know, there's a need more than ever for local communities to get global visibility. So I think that in the end, what we have created with this global network of advanced manufacturing hubs, it's a mechanism who helps local communities connect globally, but also draw from what is happening at a global level. And we create a sort of a virtuous cycle in which collaborations is starting to happen and take off at speed. And maybe to conclude, I think it's this ability to connect the global with the local to the global, but also the local to the local, that is quite unique. And I would love to hear from Cynthia, from Oscar, and from Bruno from Brazil, what their views are as well.
Sure. Well, you know, you make an interesting point I'd like to expand upon a little bit. I think, you know, with globalization by its very nature, it allows countries and companies from around the world to cross-pollinate their ideas and come up with more innovative solutions, you know, to improve the economic climate for the world as a whole. So, Francisco, could you also talk a little bit about the formation and vision of the World Economic Forum? You alluded to it earlier, but if you could just delve more details.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, the vision is that we now have 9 hubs around the world. So the vision is to take this to the next level and potentially have 100 in 2 years from now. But why we need that is because we want to have what we call a global network of local communities in place that
Sure.
can help us collectively advance and further accelerate the transition towards the future of manufacturing, or, you know, accelerate the deployment of Industry 4.0. I think that that's the vision.
Yep. Okay. All right. And then again, just one final question. The World Economic Forum, we created the global AMHUB network. So what was the decision what drove that decision, and what's the mission of this AMHUB group?
Well, I think that the decision was pretty much triggered by the fact that the more we connected with local communities, the more we realized that the challenges that we're facing were pretty much the same. And we can expand on that later on, but, you know, from the need to reskill the workforce, to support technology adoption to SMEs, to have access to new financing mechanisms, especially in turbulent times like the ones that we are navigating, and all the way to the need to come up with more sustainable production processes to contribute to the lowering of CO2 emissions. I think that, you know, solutions are going to be and need to be unique, but some of the problems we're facing are and will remain global. So that's why also this kind of dialogue and cooperation at a global level is needed, and why we decided to help the local communities establish this network. I think that an important point now is that the forum is a platform, but the network that we have established, it's owned by you, by your colleagues at Automation Allied, and all the local communities with whom we are collaborating.
Right. Francisco, thank you. We're going to move to Cynthia Hutchinson of Automation Alley. Cynthia, what makes Michigan uniquely positioned to help support this network, and how is this connection to other regions helping to move our region forward?
Thank you, Noah. Thanks for having me be part of this too. First of all, I think each AMHUB that's in the global network has really the same objectives. And I look at my colleagues, I'm pretty sure we'll land on similar things. We want to connect leaders within our regional ecosystem. We all want to create a space and a platform for an open exchange of ideas and best practices. And then ultimately the goal is to really enable true change. And here at Automation Alley, we kind of have a built-in mechanism for it because we are a membership organization. So we already have always worked with stakeholders from industry, academia, and government, as well as some social service organizations. So we've already got these layers that stack together that are necessary for a strong AMHUB or advanced manufacturing hub. What we're doing that we think will strengthen our region is we're meeting several times a year as a regional organization where we bring the Michigan people together, and we have working groups, and we have established 4, and really Francisco just kind of touched on some of the topics, whether intentionally or accidentally, but thanks, Fran. Our working groups are technology, workforce, sustainability, and regional ecosystem. And each one of those, the technology group is working on, among other things, they recently completed a roadmap on home-based manufacturing. That was really stimulated, that topic morphed after we opened up the technology group because of COVID. So, what could be done from home? How do we help manufacturers retain more of their revenue that we just heard, Chris talk about the shortfalls in Michigan. Along with that, the workforce group is looking at new ways of training and sustainability. We're talking about opening an entire new industry in Michigan, and that group is coming together to do responsible manufacturing in the apparel industry. So that's really exciting. My favorite, although if anybody's listening on technology, workforce, sustainability, love those committees too. But my very favorite working group is the regional ecosystem. And I think that's where we're all going to learn from each other, is particularly in COVID, we've all talked about things have been truly laid bare. Our deficits are laid bare. We now know what we don't know. We know where we're weak. And some of that was magnified by supply chain fractures, supply chains where, 92% of a product could be available, but that 8% that you're missing because a factory is shut down this week in Spain and next week in Brazil, we still had fractured supply chains. So in our regional ecosystem group, we're working on trying to figure out what a regional ecosystem is. Is that a North American ecosystem? We know we're always going to have globalization. Is it a dual sourcing to make sure that when we do have a far-flung supplier such as India or China, that we have a backup that's closer to home? That we, as regional mean we have a mechanism to do ground travel rather than air. So we've been meeting to talk about those kinds of things. And what's really exciting about the way the AMHUBs work is we talk about manufacturing across sectors. So it's across geographic regions, but also across sectors. So whether you're in aerospace or defense or agriculture or healthcare or automotive, they're very similar problems. And I actually find that by bringing those kinds of people together, if you do a round table with 8 people at the table and they come from 5 or 6 different industries, they're much more willing to share their ideas than they might be if they were sitting across from a direct competitor. So we're finding these pre-competitive conversations are really exciting. And that's how I think we'll strengthen our region. We'll learn from each other. You'll be hearing in a minute from Oscar and Bruno, and we want to learn from what they're doing in Spain, what they're doing in Brazil, what we can do better.
Good segue. So Dr. Oscar Lazaro, you head up the AMHUB in Spain. Can you talk about the manufacturing climate there, how it's been impacted by COVID-19? And from your country's perspective, what have you learned from being part of the AMHUB ecosystem?
First of all, thank you for hosting us today.
Pleasure.
And the invitation to participate in this panel. We are really pleased and honored. And I would like to start just by stating that I don't think the situation in Spain is any different from other regions in the world. If one thing we have learned is that this is a shared global crisis that we had to face. Maybe the waves are hitting different countries, different continents at different speeds, different time. but the effects of the crisis, I think, are globally shared. And I think this is one of the things that we have learned from this process. When we are talking about making our supply chains more resilient, I was listening to Francisco hinting this. Now these global chains are globally connected. So the fact that these waves are hitting different countries at different times with different intensities is having a global impact. So it doesn't matter how hard you are being hit in one country, you have to suffer it at a global scale. And I think this is something that we had not witnessed before, maybe in very few occasions in the last century, but I think it's something unique. And what we have learned is that under these circumstances, companies have really been very fast and very cooperative, but they had to do this on a goodwill basis. Okay, there was no real background. We were not very well prepared. And I think one of the lessons that we have to learn from this is that we will most likely be hit by this type of global crisis in the future, be a medical, geopolitical, or a recession crisis. We need to be better prepared. We need to improve our cooperation and collaboration mechanisms. And I think this is one of the big challenges we have ahead. And from our experience, being part of the Advanced Manufacturing Hub has been instrumental in starting to understand the benefits of sharing do's and don'ts. I think Cynthia was mentioning about this early initiative that we kick off, trying to really share what are the things you are doing well in your regions, guys, so we don't need to go through a painful learning curve, because this is not only costing money, it's costing lives. So I think that was a very big incentive to collaborate across regions. We were talking about a medical crisis that was hitting our economies, but it was also hitting very close relatives and people around us. So I think from that perspective, the AMHUB was very useful for the regions from the early beginning to start adopting good practices. And I think you have to learn this through painful experiences locally, but you can globally benefit from these painful lessons very fast, very effectively. And one of the lessons that, because I don't want to leave my statement only on a negative side, I think some of the companies during this crisis, they really see the opportunities for running business. This crisis has highlighted that there was a drop in demand for some sectors, but was a huge increase, a peak increase in demands from some others, not only medical. The food sector in Spain probably has experienced one of the top years in terms of business. So the food sector, they benefited from the crisis in terms of an increase of demand, and they were able to sustain their supply chains. What we need to understand is what was limiting our industry to take advantage of these increase and peaks of demand. And I think what we have learned, at least in Spain, is that there is ample room of improvement in terms of modernization and digitization of our manufacturing capabilities. We are not yet there. We are incorporating digital technologies, automation technologies in our factories, but now we have the opportunity and we have the need to do this much faster. This, I think, is something we all acknowledge. There is an acceleration in the adoption of these technologies, and maybe the challenge we have ahead of us is to start leaving just the thought of incorporating individual technologies in our factories and take a more systemic view on this approach. It is not the solution just to incorporate a single technology, it's how the supply chain, the ecosystem of our manufacturing networks are being transformed. And this requires a systemic incorporation of technologies that improve transparency, that improves collaboration, that improves cooperation capabilities in the different regions. And initiatives like the platform, the AMHUB platform, I believe, and I truly believe, that are instrumental to make this more effective.
Oscar, I couldn't agree with you more regarding your comment about the AMHUB platforms. You know, just to go back in your initial comments, you know, we talked about how, you know, the lessons learned carry forward in view of this pandemic that can be hopefully applied and applied in, you know, maybe a quicker way, because I think that, you know, all countries around the world, they sort of war game these scenarios, you know, kind of getting back to the black swan, what happens if and when, and how do we respond? And, you know, Michael Tyson said that a plan never survives its first punch in the mouth. And I think a lot of countries were caught flat-footed, but I think that this kind of brings to the forefront, you know, at least in the immediate future, what we need to do to respond to a future crisis like this. So, Oscar, thank you very much. We're going to circle back to you again in a moment, but I first want to bring Bruno in from Brazil. Bruno, I'd like to ask the same question of Brazil's manufacturing climate. What are Brazil's manufacturing priorities leading into 2021, and how is Industry 4.0 helping your region through the challenges presented by the pandemic?
So, hello to everyone. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here. It's the first meeting that we have with the community of One Advanced Manufacturing Hubs. So talking with the members, and it's very nice to me. And the COVID-19 in general has a lot of effects in the economy and the society, and of course in the lives of people. But in business, we can see changes in Brazil in regard to the market, the money that we have spent and earned from the consumers, and the organization of the companies, and of course the business scenario for the next years. And we talk about crisis, and Brazil is a lot of experience with crisis. Of course, not a crisis with this magnitude, this huge impact. But I think that the COVID-19 is being put or pinpoint some point that's very important for Industry 4.0, is that to be an agile company, to be flexible to market changes and so on. So the scenario in Brazil is not the same as Spain, but I will say that the food sector and all the products and services that are being made, are being sold to consumer, have a huge increase in demand. So, and other sectors don't have the same behavior, but this is the general scenario that we have in Brazil. But about Industry 4.0 technologies, we need to go deeper in the collect of the data with IoT to run this business in cloud and use the data with big data and artificial intelligence. I think that these three technologies are the main focus of our efforts in transforming the industry sector, the manufacturing sector in Brazil. So at the BDI, we are an agency for industrial development, and we are helping companies to do this process through this journey of transformation.
Well, thank you, Bruno. Bruno, don't go anywhere. I want to come back to you in just a couple minutes. But Francisco, I'd like to ask you, having heard from the three AMHUBs from the three continents on this call, can you discuss the similarities in these regions regarding advanced manufacturing and what you'd like to accomplish as a collective?
Absolutely, no, and I think that collectively, one of the things that we're already putting together is a repository of best practices that could help inform the next generations of strategies and policies that will be developed in each location. Now, what are those strategies and policies focusing on, and what are those points in commons they have, that I have and are facing, I think it's pretty much, a recap of what Cynthia was sharing before. And let me try maybe to double click on those. So I think that first of all, every region, every location, and every country, if we take it to national level, is struggling when it comes to the acceleration of technology adoption. And I think that we launched back in 2018 the concept of pilot purgatory, which recognizes the fact that even large companies are investing significantly in technology, but very few are able to successfully develop and deploy at scale new Industry 4.0 use cases. And you can imagine that for them, tier 1 to 3 suppliers who may not have the same research capabilities, the development and adoption and deployment of new use cases to transform production and business process more broadly, it's a real hassle. So the first commonality is this, a real challenge, which is how do we make the most out of technology? How do we democratize and accelerate the adoption and dissemination of new use cases enabled by Industry 4.0 advanced manufacturing technologies? The second commonality, which is also a big challenge that Cynthia mentioned before in the case of Michigan, I think is the need to transform the workforce at speed. And there we have, let's say, the three-partite challenge. On the one hand, you have the current workforce that has to be retrained and upskilled to be able to successfully adopt the technology and implement those new use cases that are being designed and developed. Now, at the same time, and I think that Jim alluded to this before, there is a huge talent gap. One of the reasons of why companies cannot accelerate growth and development right now is because we are not able to find the right talent. So we need to find new channels to make manufacturing jobs in manufacturing attractive and exciting for new generations, for the thousands of engineers that graduate every year and that most likely are oriented towards the tech sector and not necessarily the manufacturing sector. And then there's a third dimension which is related to the way in which we have been collaborating with other partners on the training front. I think that our traditional approach to training is simply not working anymore. And we do need to find new ways to interact, for example, in Michigan with the rich network of universities that are present in the state, and find ways for manufacturing workers, shop floor engineer to start going back and forth, in between training, formation, and on-the-job activities. And then finally, I think maybe there are two more dimensions that are common challenges. One is the need to make production systems and value chains more sustainable. And I think that Oscar was mentioning that COVID-19 is probably the first of the many disruptions that we're going to see going forward. And my belief is that climate change is posing one of the major threats. And it's going to bring new disruptions to our supplied networks and systems. So we are seeing, how Industry 4.0 is not just driving performance improvement, but it's also help reduce CO2 emissions, optimize material consumption. So the need to embrace sustainability comes also from the need to build more resilient manufacturing and supply systems. And then there's a final dimension, I think, which is related to the challenge, and which is a common challenge as well, that yes, we have invested a lot when it comes to capturing and gathering data, but very few companies are really making the most out of the data. So, finding ways to leverage or accelerate the way in which we are leveraging data, especially when it comes to data being collected across the same supply network that requires collaboration across multiple companies, is one of the other challenges. And the belief is that through our network, we are helping, our different communities share best practices, collect evidence, raise awareness on new use cases and proof of concepts to help everyone accelerate its own journey. And maybe, Noel, to recap, and I will stop there, I think that you asked as well, what do we want to achieve? I think that individually, we want each of and every half to be able to come up with the best possible and tailored strategy and plan to accelerate the successful deployment and transformation successful deployment of Industry 4.0 and transformation of its local ecosystem, and then globally to jointly learn from each other, exchange best practices, and help position manufacturing, where it should be in the global agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on. I mean, it kind of gets back to, we were talking about the cross-pollination of ideas has been accelerated, because of globalization and the work that you're doing as it relates to the AMHUBs you've created. So, I just want to go back to Oscar. Your region in Spain has great expertise in artificial intelligence as it applies to manufacturing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think that is a perfect cue with the last statement from Francisco, because if we are talking about artificial intelligence, I think we should start from data. Okay, so and I believe when we talk about artificial intelligence and industry, we face three very distinct challenges when we compare the sort of development of artificial intelligence for the consumer market. In the consumer market, we see an artificial intelligence that can be applied at a scale to many different users across different countries, across different sectors. Whereas in manufacturing, actually each factory is unique, and this uniqueness defines the competitiveness of the factory. So trying to tailor a general AI to industry in itself is a very difficult task. So how we deal with cost, complexity, and uniqueness in industry and AI is one of the big challenges. And the approach that is being taken by the region is actually to team up and to work together in the creation of data spaces and data ecosystems. And this basically implies that we are moving away from centralized gathering of data that we have seen that in the consumer market, some companies have succeeded in collecting huge amount of data about people, consumers, and they have made huge progress in AI. Whereas the approach we are taking in the region for artificial intelligence is to work on federation of data. So providing the digital infrastructure, providing the industrial agreements, providing the technology so that companies can actually create this shared data space where people keep control on access and use of data. And this implies the development of new technology, is the agreement on new standards that will have to be applied across new value chains. And that is why we are not talking only about data platforms, we are talking about data ecosystems, because there needs to be agreements between stakeholders, large companies, small and medium enterprises, to join forces to create this type of spaces. Without this controlled environment where each stakeholder can keep sovereignty on the use of the data, it is going to be more, I would say, more difficult, more costly, and probably slower to see the benefits that we all expect from AI. The benefits from AI cannot be disputed. I mean, there are double-figure improvements in competitiveness, cost reduction. But to reach to these double-figure improvements, we need to build the common infrastructure and the common approach to data sharing and data collaboration. And I believe this is one of the main challenges and one of the main routes that we are starting in the region. And again, this is a global effort because companies are connected. So these data spaces will grow locally, but we have to be global in nature. So AMHUBs are actually the perfect space where we can create this sort of worldwide partnerships that should create these new business opportunities for the region and for the companies in the country.
Yep, we couldn't agree with you more. Your observations parallel what Automation Alley and Cynthia Hutchinson, who's leading the AMHUB effort, are experiencing right now. So thank you, Oscar. Bruno, what about you? Brazil is one of the newer AMHUBs in the global network. What are your thoughts about how engagement with other regions and global collaboration may help manufacturers in Brazil? And by the way, we've done a couple trade missions to Brazil, and we're really impressed by the manufacturing acumen of the companies down there. It's an extremely important market to Michigan, but we're looking forward actually to returning to Brazil in maybe a couple more years down the road to take advantage of the growth opportunities for U.S. companies there. But again, if you could address my question about your thoughts on engagement with other regions and global collaboration and how that will help Brazilian manufacturers.
Okay, no, thank you for the question. We have some experience with some collaborations in terms of government relations, but we have some problems, some difficulties to reach the real public of our efforts here at BDI. That's the companies. So Advanced Manufacturing Hub is a new channel to tackle with this challenge, because we are connecting today, for instance, with Automation Alley, and we have the Oscar from Novalia and Betty from Advanced Manufacturing Hub initiatives at the World Economic Forum. So this opportunity for us, it's very unique because it's positioned ABDI in a place that we can connect companies that we have in Brazil with companies that we have abroad. And connections make business. And we hope that this engagement with another centers improve the business around the world. So, of course, Brazilian companies that are in Brazil, but companies that are around the world, and this collaboration can fast or accelerate this process of transformation and the exchange of ideas, the exchange of the... I was hearing Oscar about artificial intelligence. It's a coincidence because we are running a project of a data lab in Brazil in the BDI, and we are tackle with this problem with the common kernel or the common background, a common tool for artificial intelligence for companies. And we are facing the same problem. So this is an example that how we can exchange ideas, how to develop the best framework to improve the artificial intelligence development in Brazil and Spain and around the world with the other hubs. So.
All right, well, thank you, Bruno. Francisco, I know you have a hard stop at 10:30. So one final question before we let you go. Looking into 2021, what are the goals of the AMHUB Global Network? I think you sort of alluded to them earlier, but what might we expect to see as this group begins to work collaboratively to improve manufacturing readiness as well as Industry 4.0?
Well, absolutely not. And I think that some of the, I mean, it's amazing to see how, that what different AMHUBs through Oscar, Bruno, and Cynthia can build on each other's comments. I mean, it's the proof that we are all working on the same issues. So collaboration and that exchange of information can only help us accelerate pace. I think that when it comes to the goals for next year, I think that I said before that in 2 years from now, we'd love to have 100 hubs in place. I think let's try to take it to 50 by the end of this year. And we pretty much see those hubs as, almost an extension of our global platform. I think the vision is to have a global network of which is distributed and have these local communities who can drive, not just dialogue, but real action. And as Cynthia mentioned before, the transformation of industries on the ground. And hopefully also, leverage our global platform to open new avenues for businesses and for manufacturing in Michigan, in different locations in Brazil, in the Basque Country, to connect globally, to get global exposure and visibility and find new business opportunities in other and new locations. So we pretty much hope that global to local to global dialogue and exchange will only accelerate in 2021.
So Francisco, once again, I know you have to go, but before you do, Cynthia and I, as well as Automation Alley and our 1,200 members, cannot thank you enough for bringing us into your network, because this AMHUB is really increasing the global competitiveness of our companies in this region. Because, you know, when we talk about Industry 4.0, it's sometimes discussed in the abstract, but Industry 4.0 at the end of the day, it's pretty much about increasing productivity, efficiency, achieving economies of scale, and also accelerating innovation as well. So we're really proud to be part of the World Economic Forum, and thank you very much for participating with us today.
It's a real pleasure, Noel, and thanks to you and team for the truly transformational work that you're doing in Michigan. I think it's we could not have found a better partner to help advance the Industry 4.0 agenda.
We'll back at you. Thank you so much, Francisco. Happy New Year. So Cynthia, we're going to turn it back to you. You're going to put a bow on all this with our final question. Can you talk to us about AMHUB Global Network's collaboration efforts? And, you know, for that matter, what success has the group achieved thus far?
The real goal of this network, oh, I'm muted.
No, you're not. We can hear you.
But the real goal of this network is exactly what we're doing now, is to begin to come together on a regular basis within each one of our AMHUBs. We'll all run them a little differently, but when you bring together elected officials and CEOs of small to mid-sized companies and CEOs of big companies, and you start to get conversations going, the ideas really flow, and you get something that moves us beyond the inertia. We all tend to wait until we're forced to do something. COVID certainly threw us all a curve and pushed things along to where people who were not sure whether they wanted to move into an Industry 4.0 kind of environment suddenly had to. So we've seen that accelerate. Along with that, one of the things that Oscar just talked a little bit about, data collection, and so did Bruno. We look at data collection, and one of the things that some of the large manufacturing companies are very reticent to do is change everything in their factory. And one of the universities I work with just opened a new demo lab, and I'm really excited about it because it has legacy equipment sitting alongside new high-tech equipment, and they're teaching, part of what they're doing at the university is teaching students to extract viable data out of that legacy equipment to take away some of the anxiety, you know, making people feel like they got to scrap an entire factory and start over. So those kinds of things, when we get ideas from each other, it really just magnifies what we're doing. One thing we did as a group collaboratively early on, we had Lombardy region of Italy, just at the heat of COVID, we had just really launched them into the AMHUB network. And as they were struggling, they reached out to Copenhagen, a 3D printing hub of the world. And Copenhagen did some 3D printing for them to help them get their ventilators up, you know, repaired. So those kinds of things were quick resolutions we could see. And I think that's what we're going to see from each other. I think Oscar alluded to that as well. We've already worked together on a couple projects, and each, you know, I always call it, each region, each AMHUB has a superpower. Now, we all know there's something we do extremely well, and there are things we don't do so well. And we're hoping that we can grow from each other's superpowers and share that with each other, and then share it globally with people to help make everybody more successful in each one of our regions. So thank you.
All right, great way to conclude the event. So, you know, one of the greatest things about my job is I learn so much every day. And I always look forward to moderating these conferences and learning more about what's going on around the world. Because, you know, sometimes, you know, we're a big country, and, you know, we can be somewhat introspective and not open to ideas coming from places like Switzerland, Spain, Brazil, and points beyond. So this has really been enlightening. So in closing, thank you, Chris, Jim, Francisco, Bruno, Oscar, and Cynthia for being part of this great event.